DaySmart Vet can automatically calculate the sales tax on an invoice. They're first calculated as applicable at the line item level, and then that will sum up at the top of the invoice for the total taxes. Now, setting up sales tax is one of the most important things to do if it's applicable when the account is first created. And before doing so, it's very important to speak with your accountant or your local assessor to understand, first of all, what are the jurisdictions? That is, where do you perform the services or sell the items? What is the actual location? And what are the rates that are applicable in that location? And further, how are those taxes applied? Are they applied to only specific inventory types, such as diet and retail? Or if I'm in a country like Canada or Australia, there might be a flat tax that applies to all types of inventory. Now, none of this is legal advice, so it's best to speak with counsel on these types of things. But for the sake of example, if I live in the United States, oftentimes the tax is applicable only to particular types of items. And just for the sake of example and training, but I'm going to look at a website to find out what are the rates. Now here we see that in this example, we have a state tax for a certain rate, a county tax, and a city tax, as well as some other ancillary taxes for a combined total. Oftentimes, I would only pay one governmental body a lump sum based on the total, and I wouldn't necessarily have to pay the city separately, have to pay the county, and have to pay the state. Again, this is based on your jurisdiction, and you should speak with an expert in that for your area. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to create one sales tax that combines everything together based on my locational needs. So I'm going to go to DaySmart Vet, go to the settings module, and click on the configuration tab. And I can create a brand new tax by going to the bottom here for new tax. Later on, I can view taxes that I've already created and edit them right here from view taxes. I want to give that tax a name that will appear on my sales tax report in the software. That makes it very clear. So I'm just going to say, in this case, California State Sales Tax. Again, it might be broken up by jurisdiction. That's particularly relevant if I'm a mobile provider and I cross jurisdictional lines. For example, if I cross county lines or city lines, I might have different rates once I cross into those boundaries. So I would have to maybe create different taxes in the software. And based on the service location of the invoice and the appointment, the software will automatically combine the proper different jurisdictional rates to make the total. In this case, I'm combining everything into one, and I'm putting a percentage here. It's already going to be taken care of as a percentage for me for that rate. And very importantly, I'm going to choose the type. In this case, I'm combining everything in just to a state, but I have others to choose from. Very importantly, I want to type in the jurisdiction, the actual place based on that type. So state, I'm typing in California, and I have to choose this selection right here from a list so that it properly maps in our database. Here, we want to decide, does this apply to everything in our inventory? Again, in the United States, this is unusual, but not so much internationally. If I'm in the United States, often I'm going to choose specific categories. And I'm going to say, maybe in this example, diet and retail. And then I would save that right there. So it's very important to set up the inventory categories first before setting up the taxes, and also making sure your items are in the proper categories. So just to be clear, before I even set up my taxes, I want to know my rates, how they apply, what they apply to. And then in my inventory, I want to make sure that I set up my categories properly. And I want to make sure that the items are properly listed in those categories, so that by the time I actually do set up my taxes, when I apply them to those categories, that's already going to be available to select. Let's look a little bit closer at the taxes that I have in here for an example. I have here a state tax and a city tax. And those will combine for the items based on the service location on my invoice. So when I set up an invoice, I create a new invoice or an appointment, I will have the opportunity to choose if the service location is in a particular jurisdiction. Let's take it back a step and look at the configurations list here in settings. When you're first setting up your account, scrolling through this alphabetical list, you're going to be able to choose the service location. And the most simple example is if you're just on-premise brick and mortar, or maybe you just work mobile. That will give you the opportunity to change your service location to different places, or you can choose both. So if you happen to be mobile, it is important to go into the configurations list and choose that for your service location. By doing so, when you create a new invoice, you'll be able to actually set the service location on that invoice. So for example, on this invoice, I see that I have a location here in clinic. I could also choose the client's address or a different address based on the relationship with the patient. Now, if I'm a mobile clinic, I might want to set up a city tax, in this example for San Jose, and then another nearby city, such as San Francisco, if I happen to travel back and forth, and then the proper tax will be allocated based on my service location. Lastly, however you set up your taxes at the category level, you can override that on actual inventory items. I'm going to take a look at an inventory item in the module here. And I'm just going to type in a food item. And we see here on an inventory item page, we have a taxes tab. At the item level, I can see whether or not those taxes are applicable. Generally speaking, they're going to be applicable based on the categories that I set up and how I applied them in the sales tax settings for the categories. However, if I, for any reason, want to override that and put an exception at the item level, I can go to the taxes tab on the inventory item and put in an exception and then save that. Generally speaking, that is mainly because I set up the categories for the sake of reports, for the sake of discounts, for the sake of taxes. But I might have put an item in a particular category such that I could pull it up in a certain kind of report filter. But it doesn't happen to have taxes apply that I do generally at the settings level. So you might want to put an exception.